On October 4, 2024, Khamenei appeared before the public for the first time in 5 years and delivered a clear message at a mosque in Tehran that Israel's existence would not last much longer. Then, to prove this point, he carried out secret missions for Khomeini and made full use of Hezbollah, Hamas, and other proxies to strengthen his influence. During more than 3 decades in power, Khamenei faced many dangers, but he often stayed one step ahead. Then came the moment when his rule faced its greatest threat, and the weaknesses of his system were exposed. American and Israeli attacks made the situation even more complex. Eventually, he lost his life while fighting to survive. So let us take a look at the journey from his rise to his fall. We must stand up against the enemy while strengthening our unwavering faith, the then 84-year-old said to the gathering. 17 months later, Khamenei faced his final confrontation after decades of struggle against multiple enemies. Benjamin Netanyahu said on Saturday that there were signs Khamenei is no longer with us, without confirming his death. Hours later, after Donald Trump also said Khamenei had been killed, Iranian state media confirmed it. The supreme leader was targeted from the start of Saturday's strikes. Satellite images showed his secure compound was heavily damaged in the initial attack. Iran has begun 40 days of mourning after Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was killed in ongoing attacks by the United States and Israel. Israel and the US have openly sought to remove Khamenei and prompt changes in the Islamic Republic of Iran. In October 2024, Khamenei was already under pressure. Days earlier, Israel killed Hassan Nasrallah, the Secretary General of Hezbollah, with bombs on the group's headquarters in Beirut. Nasrallah's death was a personal loss for Khamenei, who had known him for decades. The Israeli air offensive against Iran in June of the previous year had also weakened Khamenei's position. It exposed the limits of Iran's air defenses and the coalition of Islamist militias he had built to deter Israel. Iran fired missiles and drones at Israel, causing some damage, but not enough to stop the attacks. The war ended after Donald Trump sent US bombers to strike Iranian nuclear sites. This was a setback to a program Khamenei had supported. That conflict left Khamenei with few options, a situation he usually avoided. He was known as careful, pragmatic, conservative, and a ruthless revolutionary. Born the son of a minor cleric in the eastern Iranian shrine city of Mashhad, Khamenei entered politics during the early 1960s. At that time, the Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, had launched major reforms that were largely rejected by the conservative clergy. As a young religious student in Qom, a center of theology, Khamenei studied the traditions of Shia Islam. He also followed the radical ideas of Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, the emerging leader of the conservative opposition. By the late 1960s, Khamenei carried out secret missions for Khomeini, who was in exile. He also organized networks of Islamist activism. Khamenei was influenced by other ideas as well. He was a fan of Western literature, including works by Leo Tolstoy, Victor Hugo, and John Steinbeck. He embraced anti-colonial ideologies common at the time. He shared the anti-Western sentiment that often accompanied them. He met thinkers trying to combine Marxism and Islamism into new ideologies. He read works criticizing Western influence in Iran. He translated works by Sayyid Qutb, an Egyptian thinker who inspired Islamist extremists, into Farsi. Khamenei was repeatedly imprisoned by Iran's security services. Despite this, he took part in the mass protests of 1978. These protests eventually forced the Shah to flee and allowed Khomeini to return. As Khomeini's protege, Khamenei quickly rose in the ranks of the radical regime. By 1981, after surviving an assassination attempt that left him unable to use one arm, he was elected president, a largely ceremonial post at the time. When Khomeini died in 1989, Khamenei was chosen as his successor. The constitution was changed to allow someone with fewer clerical qualifications to take the role. The position also came with greater powers. Khamenei used these powers to strengthen his control over Iran's fragmented post-revolutionary state. A key part of his power base was the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, a military, social, and economic force at the heart of the regime. Khamenei also built alliances with other influential groups. Then through the 1990s, he consolidated power further. He eliminated opponents and rewarded loyalists. Poets and intellectuals he had once admired were monitored or targeted by security services. Overseas dissidents were tracked. and Iran's ties with Hezbollah, which the IRGC helped create, were reinforced. Khamenei consistently advanced the principles of the revolution while acting pragmatically. In 1997, Mohammad Khatami, a reformist, won the presidency in a landslide. Khamenei allowed Khatami some room to act, but worked to protect the regime and its ideology from serious challenge. He did not prevent Khatami from reaching out to Washington after the 9/11 attacks. Khatami's efforts to improve relations were ultimately unsuccessful. Following Khomeini's precedent, Iran avoided developing weapons of mass destruction.
ما باید برخوردار باشیم از تسلیحات بازدارنده. اگر یک کشوری تسلیحات بازدارنده نداشته باشه.
Khamenei maintained control by combining pragmatism with strict adherence to revolutionary principles. He managed his alliances carefully and used the tools of state power to protect the core ideology of the Islamic Republic. His actions during this period laid the foundation for the extended rule he would maintain in the decades that followed. Khamenei supported the IRGC's actions against U.S. forces in Iraq after the 2003 invasion. He also backed efforts to expand Iranian influence in Iraq. This reflected his ongoing strategy of using proxies to project power in the region. The strategy also aimed to threaten Israel. Called the Little Satan by the revolutionaries in 1979, Khamenei was cautious about the nuclear deal negotiated by Iranian officials with the U.S. and other countries. He did not oppose its implementation in 2015. Analysts debate whether he sought to restrain or encourage IRGC hardliners, pushing for Iran to develop a nuclear weapon. Domestically, waves of unrest and reform were met with strong repression. Measures targeting women, gay people, and religious minorities continued. Economic decline added to public dissatisfaction. Many former supporters became disillusioned. Unrest and frustration spread across the country. Overseas, Khamenei invested in the so-called axis of resistance. This included Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthi movement in Yemen, and various Islamic militias in Syria and Iraq. The strategy initially appeared effective. However, it suffered under Israeli attacks during the outbreak of war in Gaza. Iran's long-standing alliance with Damascus ended after the fall of Bashar al-Assad's regime in December. Khamenei's approach combined regional proxy influence with strict domestic control. He balanced pragmatic political maneuvers with the revolutionary principles he had long championed. His actions shaped Iran's position both inside the country and across the Middle East. On Saturday, U.S. and Israeli jets and missiles struck Iran, targeting Khamenei's offices and possibly killing him. Hezbollah's new leadership issued rhetorical support for Iran, but offered no tangible assistance. Hamas has limited capability to intervene, and the Houthis appeared inactive. Weakened, Khamenei spent the following months facing a spiraling crisis. During his more than 3 decades in power, he worked to manage internal pressures in Iran. He aimed to prevent outright war and preserve Khomeini's legacy. He also sought to protect his own authority and that of his loyalists. On the international stage, some pragmatism was visible. Confronted with the U.S. military's strength and Donald Trump's demands for concessions that would remove key defenses of the regime, Khamenei attempted to delay conflict. He offered limited concessions to avoid immediate attack. Domestically, the hardline side of his leadership emerged. Police and paramilitary forces were deployed to suppress the largest wave of internal protests and unrest since the 1970 revolution, which had initially brought Khamenei to power. Before the U.S. and Israeli strikes, the CIA assessed that even if Khamenei were killed, he would likely be replaced by hardliners from the IRGC. The IRGC is the country's most powerful military force and strongly committed to the principles of the 1979 revolution, according to 2 sources who spoke to Reuters last week. Khamenei's health had long been in decline, fueling speculation about his successor. His extended tenure highlighted many of his failings and the challenges he faced. After decades of balancing opposing forces at home and abroad, his career appears to have reached a decisive end. The strikes exposed the limits of his strategies and the fragility of the alliances he had relied on. Internally and regionally, his control has weakened. His efforts to combine pragmatic diplomacy with strict ideological enforcement are now overshadowed by immediate crises. The period of careful, ruthless management that defined his rule seems to be over. Khamenei's legacy will be evaluated in the context of these final events, showing both the reach of his influence and the vulnerabilities of the system he maintained. If you want to stay updated with the latest information, join us. We will provide you with research-based insights regularly. Thank you for your time.